Feels good to be back. Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to the Chicago Bears Draft Class Review live stream. This is just going to be a live stream of the Chicago Bears review of the entire 2023 draft class. And like I said, this is the season finale of Chicago Bears Weekly. This is going to be the last episode of the season, probably series, I say probably for a while. I'm not sure when I'm going to bring it back. I know I'm going to, but I'm not sure when I'm going to bring it back. But before I get into this episode, make sure you guys leave a like on this stream. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is going to be just me reviewing and talking about this entire Bears draft class. If you guys got questions, anything you want to respond to, just leave it in the comments, and I will be sure to get to them. And let me, before I start, shout out to Tyler Monaghan for joining in. Thank you for tuning in. And this is just going to be the talking about what happened with Bears on draft night. We're going over some trades that they made, going over some things that they did throughout the course of that 2023 NFL draft, the entire process. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and dive right into the episode. All right. So as we know, the Bears traded back from the number 1 overall pick, and they get it to the number 9 overall pick. But a draft night trade ended up happening is that the Bears ended up trading to the Philadelphia Eagles back 1 spot for the Eagles to move up and select Jalen Carter. And then the Bears ultimately picked tackle from Tennessee, Darnell Wright. Now, when you look at Darnell Wright, number one, he fits exactly what the Bears are going to need. Now, he's going to be an excellent fit for the wide zone scheme that the Bears run. He can displace linemen at the point of attack. He's very physical, and he's very athletic for him to be a 6'6", 350-pound tackle. So when you look at Darnell Wright, I think the Bears got a great pick at that selection. Now, when you're talking about Darnell Wright and you're talking about some of the things that he can do with that pick and the Bears can do with him on their offensive line, that has not been one of the greatest offensive line. It's actually been a bad offensive line. You look at a guy like Darnell Wright, and he's very solid on speed rushers, and you had another guy coming out of this draft, and Will Anderson Jr., who said that he was the hardest tackle that he faced throughout the course of this season. So when you think about a guy like Darnell Wright, and they move back 1 spot and they get a 4th-round pick back in return for him, I think the Bears at this point get a very good grade, a very good value at that pick, because when you start to think about some of the elements of this Bears offense and some of the things that they do like to do, he fits exactly. He's very physical. He can move. He can pass protect. And the number one thing coming into this offseason as a whole is that the Bears needed to protect a guy like Justin Fields. So when you start to really, really think about it, as Naima Basu just joins in, thank you for tuning in. Shoring up the offensive line and the defensive line were a must in this draft, which was true. I felt that they did as far as the interior defensive line, could still use an edge rusher. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I kind of do agree that I thought they were going to get an edge rusher in this draft, a little bigger time edge rusher, but they did secure some of the interior of this defensive line. So I do agree there. So let's just get right back into Darnell Wright. And Darnell Wright, he's not really necessarily laterally quick, but he fits perfect for that play action RPO type of style of offense that the Bears ultimately like to run. So when you think about a guy like a Darnell Wright that's coming into your franchise, that's coming into your team, that ultimately he wants to be a very successful player. He wants to be a player that, well, he's going to be a player in this Bears offense that's going to show up and it's going to show out. And he's going to do a lot of different things as far as helping with this Bears offensive line goes. Now, it's interesting to going to see that I think they're probably going to play him at that right tackle spot, which I think is going to be more fitting for him, especially when you have young Braxton Jones at that left tackle spot. So when you start to think about this Bears element and the Bears offensively and the things they do actually like to do, he fits this very well because he is personally, to me, a guy that is a very good player, very physical player, very strong player. And I think at that value for that number 9, number 10 pick, he was the best player to get. And if Peter Skoronski was still on the board, I thought they were going to go with him, but they ended up not and ultimately drafted him. So I do like that. But at the end of the day, it is a very good pick. Now, I'm going to get into a couple of these comments. This is the smartest pick we could have taken. I honestly fully agree with that. I think that was the best pick for the Bears at that number 10 overall pick. And shout out to Bear Down from H-Town. Thank you for tuning in. He says, I have no issue with Poles. What Poles did this draft, he turned the number 1 overall pick into an absolute haul. Trust the process. He did. He got an absolute haul for number 1, and then he moved back one spot to get to that number 10 pick, and they still got a very good quality offensive lineman off the board. Now, I personally always said before heading into this draft process that I personally wanted a guy like a Paris Johnson Jr. out of Ohio State. That was one guy that I really pushed that the Bears could get, and I really hoped that the Bears could get was a guy like a Paris Johnson Jr. But at the end of the day, we ended up with Arizona moving up from the number 12 spot, I think they were at, if I'm not mistaken, in order to pick Paris Johnson Jr., which left still guys like him on the board. They still left guys like a Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern on the board. So at the end of the day, I think you still get a very good play. You still get very good value. You know, he's not as laterally as quick, but you think in this Bears offense, he's not necessarily prone to be as laterally as quick. So I think they got the right fit, and I think I give this grade an A. I give this pick in particular an A because they got value, they got need, and they got somebody who can plug and play right away alongst that offensive line. When you talk about with Braxton Jones, when you're talking about an offensive line that also has Nate Davis, they signed a free agency, Whitehair, so and Tevin Jenkins along that offensive line. So when you start to think about some of the Bears keys, some of the Bears pieces on the offensive line, I really think that you get a very quality guy in a guy like him. So I really think you get very good quality in Darnell Wright to go along with that offensive line. And that's probably going to move and shift Cody Whitehair to the center spot. Tevin Jenkins is probably going to play one of the guard spots. I'm assuming probably right guard. So, or left guard, because I think Nate Davis is probably going to come in and play right guard. So at the end of the day, I think your offensive line gets that much better with the addition of Darnell Wright, and I give this an A. Now, shout out to Elijah Finnegan. He says, I'm a Vol fan, so it's great to see a Vol in a Bears uniform. Shout out to you. Thank you for tuning in. I'm glad that you were tuning in. You're a Volunteers fan. I don't run into many of Tennessee fans. Usually I run into a lot. If we're talking about college football, I usually run into a lot of Michigan fans or Illinois fans or Alabama fans, or I've got a couple of friends that are fans of the U. So you don't run into a lot of Tennessee fans. So I'm actually you're probably the first one that's actually a Tennessee fan that I've probably encountered in period. So I give that Bears number 10 pick and their first pick in the first round, their first pick in the draft, I give that one an A. Now, as we move on to the next pick, we get Gervon Dexter, defensive tackle out of Florida. Now, we get help to beef up that interior of the Bears defensive line. And when you think about the interior of the Bears defensive line last season, it was one of those things, it was one of those units that it really wasn't a productive unit. It really wasn't one of those units that was A, any good, was B, any bit of productive, especially on the interior of that defensive front. So when you start to think about the Bears and you start to think about some of the things that they really had, I really, really believe that this Bears unit is a lot better with a guy like Gervon Dexter on it. Now, you had Justin Jones last season that he was a solid player. He didn't have a bad year, but when you look at the rest of it, you look at Armon Watts, you look at the rest of that Bears defensive front, it just really wasn't that productive in 2022. So they address a need to get a guy who can play that one technique and he can play that three technique to pair with Justin Jones on the interior to help the Bears run defense that was the second worst, which was ranked 31st in the NFL last season. So when you start to talk about some of the things that they improved with a guy like Gervon Dexter, he was still on the board at that number 53 overall pick, and they made the pick. But while he's a little bit of a hit or miss as far as some of his efforts go, when you watch some of his film and you watch some of his tape, he has a rare combination of size, strength, and speed that doesn't come around with it when you're talking about an interior defensive player. Now, he'll become a player that I think if he starts to buy into what Matt Eberflus preaches and what into Matt Eberflus does, I think he can become a very productive player on the interior of that Bears defensive line. So when you look at it from that standpoint, they do have Justin Jones on the roster. They do pick up Andrew Billings in free agency. So you do beef up the interior of your defensive line that was just an absolute need of talent, an absolute need of depth, an absolute need of a productive rotation. And I think when you get a guy like Gervon Dexter, I think when you come into that, he could become, I personally think he may become a starter at some point if he proves during the fact of his offseason, he proves during the fact that the preseason that he could be a very good upfront presence up front. I think he could become a guy that actually becomes a starter within the course of this Chicago Bears defense. Now, this defense, it was, let's say, we could just be honest, it was one of the worst. It was one of the worst defenses that we've probably ever seen in Chicago Bears history, if we're going to be honest. It was probably one of the worst. So when you think about that Bears defensive unit and the things that they lacked up front, they can really, really, really help with a guy like Gervon Dexter in that interior. So when you're talking about the things that they do in this draft, when you talk about what the things that they've done, and we're going to get into the rest of those draft picks later, when you get into some of the things that this team has done throughout the course of their draft and the things that they have done throughout the course of the interior of their line, I think this is just a step in the absolute right direction. Now, I'm getting a little things together here, but I think this was just a step in the right direction, a step to help build this roster to be a whole lot better in 2023, excuse me, and improve from what they had in 2022. So I give the grade of Gervon Dexter as I'm kind of scrambling around a little bit here. As I give the pick of Javon Dexter, I really, really give this pick I really give it a B. I'm going to say a A to a B, A plus to a B. No, A minus to a B plus. But I really like the fit. I really like that he is a very physical presence, and I like the fact that he can go against the run. Now, shout out to Elijah Finnegan. He says Travis Gibson is pretty solid, so maybe there's a few things he can learn from him. Now, I'm going to touch on Travis Gibson a little bit. Travis Gibson, in my opinion, I think he's more of a 3-4 defensive end because he's a little bit lankier. He's a little bit, I'm not going to say undersized as far as height goes, but he's a little lankier. He's a little bit long arm. And I think personally, in my opinion, I think he's one of those players that he plays better when his hand is off of the ground versus when his hand is on the ground. So when you start to talk about some of the things that he can do with as far as this offense goes, his defense goes, I think when you look at it, he is one of those players that really, really fits into what they do, and he really, really fits into what they did with Sean Desai, and I don't believe that he really fits with this Matt Eberflus defense because he's more of I want to say an outside linebacker type, edge type that is not as good with his hand on the ground versus when he's standing up. So I think Travis Gibson, I thought was probably one of those guys that was probably going to be a casualty, especially he underperformed last year. So I'm a little bit surprised that they brought him back, but nonetheless, I think he does. I don't think his skill set fits with what Eberflus does. I hope I get proven wrong. So I just think that's where we're going to stand with him. Next pick in the 2023 draft for the Bears, they ended up drafting Tyrique Stevenson out of the U. Now, he's going to fit well with this Bears cover 2 scheme. Now, he wasn't one of those corners that he was a man-to-man lockdown, he's going to shut you down type of corners that you a lot of times see within the course of this league. So when you think about the things that he really does throughout the course of his career and a lot of the things that he's able to do, and the Bears actually really needed some depth to add to that cornerback position when you're talking about Jalen Johnson. He's heading into the last year of his contract. You have young guys like Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon. You have Eddie Jackson, albeit he's coming off of a foot injury that he suffered last year, but he was having a very good season up until that injury. So when you start to look at some of the things that this team does, I think you're going to be very, very good with a guy like Tyrique Stevenson to add to that depth of your cornerback room. He's a very physical player, which fits Matt Eberflus's philosophies and fit Matt Eberflus's scheme. So when you talk about him in that manner with this Bears defense, you're going to need some physical play out of your cornerback spot. You're going to need a guy that he needs to, I think, in my opinion, needs to be a little bit more consistent. And that's probably why he fell into the second round. He just wasn't one of those consistent players during his time at the U. He can make plays. He has very, very good speed. He can break around the football. He needs to be more consistent. And he's not going to be asked to be one of those top-notch guys that a lot of teams has in his defense. He's going to be, I want to say, maybe corner 2, or if they keep Kyler Gordon in the inside, I still think he can come into this team and he can contribute right away. So I do believe that this was another good pick for the Chicago Bears in this 2023 draft. And I'll give this grade a B. You get a day 1 potential starter at the cornerback spot in the second round. You get a guy who really comes in and he fits into this Matt Eberflus cover 2 scheme, 4-3 scheme. And he has ability to make on the football. And the Bears need to increase some of their turnovers, which I think will help them a ton as a young football team, as a football team that is still building. And I think he can help with that aspect of the game. So with the pick of Tyrique Stevenson for the Chicago Bears and for what they are trying to do. I give this a B. I really like it. It's interesting to see what he's going to come in and be amongst that Bears front. So we're going to give him a B. Now, the next pick of the Bears 2023 NFL draft, the Bears ended up selecting, if I can get this right, I'm going to put this right here. They ended up drafting defensive tackle Zach Pickens out of South Carolina. Now, this is just another depth interior player to help boost the Bears defense. As we already seen, they've already at this point drafted Gervon Dexter. And you get another guy in Zach Pickens who can come in and add a physical presence, a physical depth within the course of this Chicago Bears defense. Now, when you start to talk about the things that this Bears defense is trying to do and where you think this Bears defense is trying to be, you really start to really look at where this team is trying to be and where this team is. And I think you can really get started with this Bears defense at the front in their trenches with the pick of Zach Pickens. Because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, this Bears defensive front was not a good one. It was not a good unit at all, and it was one of the worst, in the second worst run defense. And you get a guy like Dexter, and you get a guy like Zach Pickens who can come in and really, really add more to the trenches. And I've always said that when you talk about the Bears coming into this draft, they needed to address both trenches, which is offensive line, and they need to address defensive line. He's a very good run defender that upgrades this Bears interior of their defensive front, because a lot of players last year, they were just inexperienced and they just didn't have a lot of the gifts and a lot of physical tools to be actually truly productive as they were asked to be, because when this Bears roster was a lot thin at that defensive end, the defensive tackle spot. So when you come into a guy like Zach Pickens, who is very explosive, he's going to be probably more of a run defender than anything in pass protection or pass rushing. So he's going to help beef up and bolster this run defense with Billings, with Dexter, with Justin Jones, even though I think Justin Jones is a little bit more versatile. And I think he's the most versatile player out of all of the ones that are on the Bears defensive front when we're talking about the defensive tackle spot. So you address a need. You get the guy that also potentially start at that one technique spot in his 4-3 defense. And as we've seen in the cover 2 4-3 defenses in Chicago Bears history, whether you had guys like Tommy Harris, whether you have guys like Tank Johnson, Spice Adams to help with the interior of this defensive line and the defensive front and really, really bolster up that run defense, I think Zach Pickens can come in and make that type of an impact where he comes in and he really, really helps with this Bears defensive front. And with this pick for the Bears, I also give this one a B. You get great value. You get great potential at that defensive tackle spot, a guy who can plug and play, and he will be likely a starter or a likely rotational piece when you're talking about that the Bears defensive front. So when you look at it from that standpoint, you really, really upgraded your defensive line. Excuse me. When you're talking about a guy like a Zach Pickens. So for this, I'm going to give this a B. Now, the next pick in the Bears draft, if I can, I'm a little bit behind. Has been dealing with a few things. As the Bears' next pick, they ended up drafting Roschon Johnson out of the University of Texas to help add depth to this running back room. Now, when you look at Roschon Johnson's tape, he's very explosive. But let me get to these comments a little bit. Elijah Finnegan says he loved what Ryan Poles is doing, and I totally agree. Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles has a really, really structured philosophy, and they really know what they're trying to do and what they're ultimately trying to build with this Bears roster. Now, we've already went over the first 4 picks when you talk about the interior and Darnell Wright. When you talk about of the interior offensive line. Well, your offensive line of Darnell Wright, the interior defensive line with Gervon Dexter, with your cornerback spot with Tyreek Stevenson to help outside. When you talk about drafting Zach Pickens to help more beef up your interior, their defensive line, I think this team got the proper value for their guys. Now we're going to talk about Big Mike the Gamer. What's happening, bro? He just says hi. I really appreciate you tuning into the stream. Now, as we're going to talk about Roschon Johnson, the Bears' 4th-round pick, 115th overall, I think they get a really good gem of a running back at this spot. Now, we all know Bijan Robinson was the main talk coming out of the University of Texas, and he was one of those guys that he didn't get a lot of playing time because Bijan Robinson's talent was just so explosive and so good. But when he got his time, he really, really showed out. And he's a running back, kind of a similar mix to a David Montgomery, where they really, really run the football hard. And that is something that David Montgomery brought, and we're going to miss out a little bit with him. But I think they get a really good player that gives very good explosiveness, very good speed, and Roschon Johnson. He's one of those guys that he can come in and be a rotational piece. He's very elusive, and he's very powerful for a running back position. But I really feel that a guy like Roschon Johnson, along with D'Onta Foreman, along like Khalil Herbert, who really has standout and breakout kind of a years, when we're talking about the Chicago Bears offensive running back position, you're talking about a team that is just going to become better, I think better and better and better but as time goes on. So when you start to think about this Bears running back spot, and you start to think about what the Bears can do potentially at that running back position, I think you're going to add more depth to the room. Just say maybe an injury goes down. He's one of those guys that can come and step in, or if he starts to really play really good football, he's one that can step up and add to that running back room and add to the role of being a very solid running back in this team. So when you talk about Bijan Robinson, he does have the combination of passing, explosiveness and speed. I'm not going to say he's one of the best wide receiving running backs, which I think the Bears could utilize a little bit of the screen game a little bit more. I think when you get a guy like Roschon Johnson, he's going to be a guy that's kind of similar to a David Montgomery who they lost, and he's going to break a lot of tackles, and he's going to be a compliment to D'Onta Foreman. He's going to be a compliment to a guy like a Khalil Herbert. So when you talk about him for this grade for the Bears, I'm going to give this a solid A. Solid pick. You get value at that spot. You get a guy who can come in and be a very, very contributing piece, and you get a guy who can come in and maybe he could be some special teams type of player here and there, but you get a guy who could come in and make some plays and make some things happen. And then on top of that, you get your kind of Minshew type of, I want to say, replacement for a guy like a David Montgomery. So at the end of the day, I really give this Bears pick an A. Solid pick. You get a guy who's similar to Montgomery, and you don't have to pay that wide contract or that higher money contract that you would have to pay to a guy like David Montgomery, and you still get a very similar replacement in Roschon Johnson. So I give this an A. Next, excuse me. Next pick, the Bears draft wide receiver Tyler Scott out of Cincinnati. Now, when you talk about Tyler Scott, his 4.32 speed is absolutely dashing, and he adds more speed to this Bears wide receiver room. He's very fast. He's very quick. And when he was between his 2021 and 2022 seasons at the Cincinnati, he caught 84 passes for 1,419 yards and 14 touchdowns. And what is even more impressive, he was still able to accomplish a lot of that because he was transitioned from a running back to a wide receiver in college. So he still has a lot of growing to do, but yet he has a lot of upside at that wide receiver position. to help bring that depth in the room. When you're talking about DJ Moore, who they brought in during the trade, Darnell Mooney returning back from a foot injury, Chase Claypool being more ingratiated or ingrated, whatever the word may be I'm trying to think of at this point, he'd be more inserted into this Bears offense, and he'd be more familiar with the system. You bring back St. Brown, which I think he was more of a blocking receiver anyway. I still, to the life of me, I kind of don't understand that they brought Dante Pettis back. You give Velus Jones back, I think he's going to be another complementary speed player because Velus Jones is bigger. Velus Jones has a lot of speed himself. So you add more speed to the wide receiver room, and he brings a couple of things that you can have a big play threat in a guy like Tyler Scott. When he was in college, he averaged 44.6 yards per touchdown in college. So you get more of that big play ability that can really help this Bears offense become a lot better as far as passing wise. And you complement that with getting a solid right tackle in Darnell Wright in the first round, and you get Roschon Johnson, and you get a guy like Tyler Scott. So when you talk about this Bears defense, we say about the defensive presence. Now we're talking about the Bears offensively, what they've added to this point. They've added another guy who can bring some speed, bring another big play threat, because Justin Fields, he's very accurate. I think he's very accurate throwing the ball deep. And some of the things that the Bears lacked last year is a little bit of speed. And they lacked a little bit of it, even though Velus Jones had his struggles. Darnell Mooney was out with injuries. Dante Pettis is not really a breakaway speed guy. Neither is the Nekonemi and St. Brown. None of those guys are really breakaway speed. So you add more speed in DJ Moore already. You add Darnell Mooney and back healthy. So at this point, I think you give this grade for the Bears. I think you give this one. I think I'm gonna give this one a B plus. And Mike the Gamer says Chicago Bears draft is great. He gives it a B plus. I'm not gonna say my grade on the draft just yet. I will give that at the end of the video. But when you talk about that, you give them a B plus. I can actually agree with that, to be honest with you. I can actually agree to that. But Elijah Finnegan says Bears fans want Velus Jones off the team, but I don't think we should get rid of him because he's got speed, and there's a way you can utilize that. That is absolutely true. I've seen a lot of Bears fans clamor to kind of get rid of Velus Jones. It's just 1 year. And he was in year one of basically a team that was in rebuilding mode. So I think with Velus Jones, I think he's a little bit in a perfect situation. He was able to get some of those growing pains and get himself acclimated and adjusted mentally. And we all know the physical capabilities is there. He has the speed. He can get some things done as far as the pump return game and the kick return game. I just think it was a little bit of a tougher adjustment for him to be at the NFL level, because not a lot of guys come in and hit the ground running right away. As we've seen this with Velus Jones, it took him a little bit. It took Velus Jones a little bit to really start to get the ground running when we talk about some of the things in his football game and in his makeup and mental makeup, because it takes not only the physical skills, it takes a lot of the mental skills to really help with this transition that you're going to have from playing in college to the NFL. So Velus Jones, I like him personally as far as his things he could do playing and the things he could do with the return game and his speed as well. So he was in the perfect situation from that. But Tyler Scott, he's a guy that brings some of the similar things that Velus Jones brings. I think he's a little bit smaller. He's going to be more of a backup type of wide receiver or guy who's a complementary piece when we're talking about this offense. So I really like that pick. He's going to have a chance to make plays. And that is all the Bears need in this offense. They need guys who can make plays. Point blank and period. They need players that can come in and make plays within the fourth of this offense. So I give this one a B. I give this pick of Tyler Scott a B. Get good value. Get a guy who's exceptionally fast and you get a guy who is a big play threat, and you get him in the 4th round. So, and Darnell Mooney was a late pick as well. So I think he has the capabilities to come into this Bears roster and really, really produce. But like I say, leave you guys your thoughts and your questions as we go over the entirety of this Bears 2023 draft class. I would love to see what you guys think about a lot of these picks, or just where the Bears stand as a team right now after the draft, and after a lot of the moves have been made in free agency and the re-signings of guys have been done. This is also going to be a state of the Bears discussion as well. So I would like to see what you guys think about it. But the next pick that the Bears made in this 2023 NFL draft was the 5th round pick, ranked 148th overall. And that is going to be Noah Sewell from Oregon. Now, he was a 3-year starter at Oregon. He is the younger brother of Lions tackle Penei Sewell. So he comes from that bit of a background. As Joseph Gateman, shout out to you for tuning into the stream and thanks for the comment. They are building the foundation rookie contract. I absolutely agree, because you have to start with the foundation of your football team. Of course, you have some of the guys like Fields, like a Mooney, like a Eddie Jackson, a little bit more veterans. Of course, Eddie Jackson's presence. He's more of a veteran. Cody White here, he's a bit more of a veteran. Equanimeous St. Brown, Dante Pettis, they've been in this league for quite a while. So you get a lot of players that are young. You get some younger guys in, but you also still have some veterans to mix with this roster. Not only veterans that not are bench warmers. You have some veterans that can come in and produce. Tremaine Edmunds, that we talked about, can come in and he can be a very contributing piece to the Bears linebacking core, along with TJ Edwards, who had a very productive season. So it's not like this Bears roster is, I want to say, older or anything by the tooth, but I think they have a nice mix of guys who are young, like 3 to 4 year type of players. And they also bring in a draft class that not only do they have a lot of things that we can talk about as far as they can come in and produce. They don't have that structure of being a Super Bowl team. They can come in and actually develop into the players that the best players that they can be, not only for themselves, but for this Bears roster as well. So I like what they're doing. They're building a foundation of a very successful football team. And you already have your quarterback one in Justin Fields. So I really do like what they're doing. Shout out to Calvin Swanson. Thank you for tuning into the stream. Don't forget that in our wide receiver room, we have 3 guys with 4.3 speed and another 3 with 4.4. We now have speed, length, and size in our wide receiver room. Very scary group there. Now, I actually agree. It's just they have to put it all together, of course. But if they were to put this all together, get this passing offense from the Bears higher, get this passing team from the Bears a lot higher, I really, really think that this Bears unit can really, really be a very, very successful one. And I think this Bears unit could be a very, very productive unit. So when we're talking about this wide receiver room, which I touched on a little bit, you have a mix of size. You have Equanimeous St. Brown, who has some size to him. You also have a guy like Darnell Mooney, who's a little smaller, but he's speedy. DJ Moore, speed. Dante Pettis is a little bit bigger. Chase Claypool has some size and some speed. So does Velas Jones Jr. and Tyler Scott, who I previously just talked about coming out of the draft. So he do add a lot of pieces to this wide receiver room. Do you think Moore is a true wide receiver one? Yes, I do. No matter who the quarterback play was in Carolina, whether it was Newton for that time, whether it's been Darnold, whether it's been Teddy Bridgewater, whether it was Baker Mayfield at times, you saw DJ Moore still thrive, and you still have him successful. And PJ Walker during those times as well. So it's not like this Bears football team is, I want to say, like lacking or anything. Like DJ Moore is lacking. He's still, with bad quarterback play, he was still a very productive receiver, one at the Carolina Panthers. And I think you have a little bit more surrounding him. You got better quarterback play. And I think you have a little bit more weapons surrounding him because the Robbie Anderson, well, his name is Chosen Anderson, did now. That didn't work. So I think you have a little bit more around him, and I think he's of course going to command more coverage, but you have Mooney, you have Claypool, you have Jones, you have Tyler Scott, speedy guys that can help take a little bit of the pressure off of him and be more threats. So I think you're going to see him open up a little bit more with Fields, and they can get that continuity together. They're going to grow. But let's get back into some of the pick, and that was the pick that I left off on. That was the 5th round pick of Will Sewell, the younger brother of Penei Sewell. He was a 3-year starter. He has a potential to be a very good steal for this Bears football team at that linebacker spot. Now, of course, this linebacker spot coming into this all season was a little thin because you only had at the roster at the time before all the free agency was Sanborn. Sanborn was the only linebacker coming into this free agency period that was on the roster. So to bring in a guy like Tremaine Edmunds from the Bills, to bring in a guy like TJ Edwards, still have Sanborn. You bring in Dylan Cole, I think is going to help more of his special teams. Sewell, I think he's a guy that could be a backup reserve. He can be a special teams type of player. And his high motor during his 3 years at the University of Oregon, he's a 3-year starter there. So he's not like you're going to get a scrub. You're going to get a guy that can fly around to the football. He has solid speed at that linebacker's position. So we're looking at Noah Sewell, and he does have that pedigree of being the younger brother of a guy like a Penei Sewell. So maybe the mental aspect of him, you're not going to sit here and you're going to necessarily look at a guy that is not going to be a little bit more acclimated. He's going to have his big brother to help him out. So I think that's going to help him as far as his transition down the line and being a very solid football player for this Bears team. Now, we look at his tackle numbers. He had 114 tackles in 2021. He slipped up a little bit, but he was still very productive in 2022 with 56 tackles, an interception as well. And he had an interception in 2021. 2021 was his breakout year when he had 114 tackles and 2 forced fumbles. So it's not like the guy isn't a guy who can come in and contribute. Like I said, I think he's probably going to be more of that special teams type of guy, more of that guy who can come in and help on your special teams along with the Dylan Cole, and he could be a reserve linebacker for you if anything else was to happen as far as this Bears roster goes or injuries go. So he had 8 tackles for loss in 2021, along with those 114 tackles. But he can also get after the quarterback a little bit. He can affect the pass rush from that linebacker position with defensive blitzes, which he finished with 7.5 sacks throughout the course of his career. He's a little shaky in pass coverage, which I think is going to hurt him a little bit, coming into this draft. He's not the greatest of pass coverage guys. So when you actually start to think about it, and he says the linebacker core is looking awesome, I really agree. The core of this linebacker position for the Bears is looking really, really good. So you think about Noah Sewell, and you think about some of the things that he can bring to this Bears football team. I think I'll give this grade a B. You get a solid value. You can use a guy in depth, which, like I said, this linebacker roster was very, very thin coming into the offseason, and they addressed it with not only Edmunds and Edwards, but they get a guy like Cole as well, and they also get Noah Sewell in this draft. So the linebacking core for the Bears has dramatically improved. Now, we know we traded Wilquan last year, and we had a guy like Joe Thomas and Matt Adams, if I'm not mistaken, right? Nicholas Morrow as well. All those guys are gone except Sanborn. So you get a very brand new linebacking core, and you get him Edwards on a cheaper price. You get Sewell that can come in and be productive and be a backup and roll a rotational piece. I'll give this grade a B. He's probably going to be more special teams. Sanborn is going to be a beast too. You've seen a lot of that. This guy, Sanborn just flies around to the football. Linebacking cores are going to be stacked. I actually totally agree. I'm not going to say stack, but an improvement over last year post Roquan Smith trade. Absolutely. Post Roquan Smith trade upgrade. Absolutely. Now, with this next pick, the Bears also decided to go defense as well. And they ended up select. I'm sorry, guys. My voice is just kind of going in and out at the moment. But when you look at the next pick of the Bears 2023 draft, as I get little things together, the Bears ended up with the 5th round, 165th pick. They ended up selecting Terrell Smith out of Minnesota. Now, if you're looking at Terrell Smith, he's a very sizable corner at 6'1", 204. He has very solid speed with the 4.41, and he has length in 32 and 7/8 reach. So he's a corner that he's long, he can fly, and he is strong, and he has good speed. And that is a typical of some of those press corners, but he has the instincts to be one of those better corners in off-ball coverage. So when you start to think of a quarterback, a corner like a Terrell Smith, you get him at good value in the 5th round, and you still have a younger little bit of a secondary, but you add a guy like him that can come in and be a solid contributing piece to this Chicago Bears team. I really like what they've done with the pick of Terrell Smith. Now, he is also a guy that he's a 5-year player in college, and he was a backup his first couple of years, but he came in and he was a very good starter, and he started to get better each and every single season. Now, he's a very physical player. He's not 38 tackles, including 4.5 for loss, and 2 sacks. So he's a very speedy corner that could you bring off the edge, probably in that little nickel of a spot. Hold on, guys. But he's one of those corners that he can come in and be very, very solid and very, very productive along this Bears football team. He's a piece that is just going to add some depth to this Bears corner spot. Now, you still have a younger secondary. The most productive veteran guy is a guy like excuse me, is a guy like him, or Jalen Johnson. But you get younger, you still remain young on your defensive side of the ball. You still remain as one of those guys, there's teams that can come in and develop with your young corner. And I really, really like this pick for the Bears. It's a really, really solid pick. It's really one of those picks that is a very good player. It's a very good team for the Bears to have. So I really personally like this pick. You get a size corner. You get somebody who can play outside or inside. He's a press corner, but he's also good off the ball. He's also good in blitzing. And he's also good in a lot of other areas that you can help with your football team. He's long enough to break up some passes. He's long enough to make some things happen, of course, of this Bears defense. So when you're talking about that corner spot, I like that pick of Terrell Smith. I really, really do. And he's a guy that he comes in and brings a lot to this football team. So when we're talking about him, I'm going to give this grade a B. I'm going to give the Terrell Smith grade a B. So I like the pick of Terrell Smith. Let's get a little things going here. I'm sorry about this, guys. I was kind of running in a bit late. Going into the stream, had some other things going on. Don't forget Brisker, too. Yes, Brisker is a very good player to add with this solid rookie year. So we can't forget about Brisker. You are absolutely correct. You cannot forget about him. But let me get one more thing. Sorry about this, guys. I'm been all over the place this morning. So we're going to get into the next pick, and it was Travis Bell, defensive tackle out of Kennesaw State, who's just going to be a depth rotational piece for the Bears on their defensive front. So he's just going to be a rotational piece. He's just going to be depth for this Bears roster. So when you think about it, it is a very, very solid pick. You get a guy who more going to be probably a special teams type of player, probably going to be a rotational piece if he makes the roster, because a lot of 7-round picks sometimes don't stick around. So you get a guy in Travis Bell who can come in and he can play some really solid football for this Bears football team. So I'm liking this pick. It's a very, very solid pick for them. And he's a guy who's athletic. He's a one technique type of player coming in at 310. And he's very quick and he's powerful, but he just doesn't he doesn't have the size that a lot of interior players, but he has foot quickness and he is good getting around blockers. And he could be possibly a rotational one technique type of nose tackle, type of interior defensive tackle in this league. So you give this grade, I give this a B. You still add depth to a bad defensive front. You get a guy who's still a rotational piece without the course of your defense. And you get a guy that is a need for your football team. So you can't be mad at this pick at all. Now, of course, like I said before coming into this draft, say that interior depth was something that they needed. It was a need in all facets of the interior of their defensive line. They needed it. They absolutely needed it. And when you talk about that, I really like this pick. So I'm going to give the pick of them picking Travis Bell. I'm going to give them a B for that pick as well. You get solid value, possibly contributing guy that can come in and be a rotational piece along this Bears defensive front that was just not very good last year. So I think I'm going to give them a B for this pick. Now, the last pick that the Bears had in this draft, and it addressed another need on the defensive side of the ball, and that's Kendall Williamson from Stanford. Now, he's a guy is just going to bring more depth to this Bears roster, which I've used that word a lot throughout the course of this stream. He is going to bring some depth. He had started his career 2018, as I look at some of this, with Stanford. And then he played a total of 44 games while racking up 213 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, a sack and a half, and an interception. So he's not going to create a lot of turnovers. He's I think he's more of a physical type run defending safety versus him in pass coverage. He's very physical, but he doesn't necessarily have a lot of the speed that can close and get to the football, and he's a little late getting into coverage. So I think this pick is more depth, and it's more probably be a special teams type of player, but he is one of those players that can come in and step in if necessary for this Bears football team. Come in, step in, necessary if he makes the roster, be more of a special teams type of a player. It's a lot of players that he can grow to more, but he's very, very physical. He's a tall guy. He's very, very good. I think at that 40, he's at solid speed with a 4.49. So he's not a slouch at all. I just think more of him is going to be more of a depth piece for this Bears defense and probably more pieces to add to the Bears special teams unit. So when you think about it, it is going to be a B for me for this pick. Now, to close out the episode, I'm going to give my grade on this draft. Now, like I said earlier, I like to pick a Darnell Wright because you get a right tackle who could come in and plug and play immediately. And that was one of the needs going into this offseason. The Bears missed on McGlinchey. McGlinchey ended up signing a deal with Denver. And McGlinchey would have been a good pick at that right tackle spot. But they still get a very physical guy like a Darnell Wright, a young guy, a guy who only let up 2 quarterback hits all entirely last year and not a single sack on amongst your offensive line. So that is going to be a big boost for this Bears roster heading into 2022. And then you get a guy that can help with your 1-3 technique in your interior with Gervon Dexter out of Florida. I really like this pick. He's very solid, very physical up front. I really like this pick for them. Tyreek Stevenson, he can come in and add cornerback depth. He can come in and play some really good football for this Bears team. And he has a good knack, I think, for getting turnovers and being around the football. So it's a nice pick there. You have Zach Pickens, another interior defensive player who brings a big, strong one technique type of a player who can be very, very physical and be very, very good up front. And you have Roschon Johnson to add more depth to the running back position and give yourselves a de facto replacement for David Montgomery. You add Tyler Scott, who's very, very speedy, and he's a big play threat that the Bears were kind of missing over the past. Definitely last season, they was missing a little bit of that big play threat. And with his 4.43 speed, he can help add some of that big play element to this Bears offense. Noah Sewell, a guy who can come in and can be a very good pass rushing from that linebacker position. He's very speedy. He has a knack for the football. And you get a guy who is very solid and can be on your special teams. Terrell Smith, long, fast, strong, a little bit of a press corner, but he's also good in blitzing as well. And you also get more depth for your defensive lineman, Travis Bell, and you also get more depth for your safety spot with the guy like a Kendall Williamson. So if I was to able to grade this entire draft class for the Bears, I give it a B+. I give this entire draft class a B+ because at the end of the day, you address a lot of your needs, which was offensive line, defensive line, linebacker depth, safety depth, and probably a playmaker at that wide receiver position, and probably to add more depth at the running back position. Now the departure of David Montgomery, and you get his replacement. So when you think about this entire Bears draft class, I'm going to give this draft class a B+, a B+ to an A. B+ to an A. I think they nailed on a lot of their picks. They moved around a couple of times. They even moved around before the third or the fourth round. And this team did a lot of finagling and a lot of shuffling. But I honestly think that they got really, really good players. They got really good value. They got really, really good talent. And they got really, really good value. They got, like I said, value. They got really, really good fits. They got needs. So I think Ryan Poles, at the end of the day, nailed this draft. And I'm going to give it the B+ to an A-. Now, it's, of course, I still think it could be a little bit more of free agent moves to go, maybe, depending on what they would like to do. But overall, when you look at this Bears roster right now, post-draft, I think you come into going into 2023, you go into it a whole hell of a lot better than you left 2022. You get a number-one wide receiver for that number one pick. You get more picks down the line. You trade, you finagle your way back. You pass on Jalen Carter, which I actually, you know what? This is the part where I kind of want to touch on why kind of the Bears pass on Jalen Carter. I actually want to get into this a little bit now because it's something that I did talk about during the first round stream. So I'm going to actually touch on this a little bit right now. Now, when you talk about Jalen Carter and some of the things that he is able to do, Jalen Carter is, we all know Jalen Carter was a top 5 talent. Jalen Carter was a top 5 talent. And Jalen Carter is one of those guys that he was very dominant when he had his time and when he was on the field in college. My thing has been with Jalen Carter, and especially seeing him firsthand during this Ohio State versus Georgia National College Football Playoff semifinal, is that Jalen Carter has some fatigue issues. It just seemed when he was on the field, you could tell his presence. You could tell when he was in there because he was dominant. You could tell his presence on the field was dominant. You could tell that his presence, that it was felt by the Ohio State offensive line, and he was able to make some things happen and make some plays. But it just seemed like during the course of that game, he was off of the field more than he was on the field. And, of course, you got a little bit of the character things that came into question with the entire reckless driver situation that ended up killing a Georgia football player and a young lady as well. So rest in peace to those two individuals. So you had a little bit of character questions coming into the draft, and it happening during the process of the NFL Combine was also not a good look. Now, we're still waiting to see how I'm not sure off the top of my head how that's going to play out or how's it played out already. But I think that was a little bit of a reason why the Bears passed on him, even though a lot of projections had Jalen Carter coming to the Chicago Bears. A lot of projections had them, if he was to still be there at number 9, he would end up being a player that the Bears will ended up drafting, which intentionally did not happen. Even though he would have been a good fit in this interior of the Bears defensive line, I also believe that another reason why they passed on him is because Philly threw them an offer to move back a spot. Philly wanted them bad enough to where they were able to get an extra 4th-round pick and do more finagling with that. So that it's a lot of different things that come into the real reason why Jalen Carter was not picking by the Bears and the Bears passed on him. But the two main things was his character, so-called, or so to speak, and the fatigue issues that kind of I'm not going to say plagued them, but you can see those were kind of pointed out. Now, Big Mike the Gamer says, I agree. Chicago Bears work hard to get draft picks. They did. They did a lot of finagling. They did a couple of trades, which got them more picks and got them some of the players that they were able to get. So I actually agree that the Bears did a lot of moving, but they did a lot of hitting in this draft. So the passing of them on Jalen Carter is one of those things that I'm not surprised by. A lot of Bears fans I saw wanted him, and I wouldn't be mad at them for wanting him. I just had a feeling that they were probably going to pass on him. I had a feeling that they were probably going to address the offensive line first, because that's Ryan Poles' specialty, is him being a former lineman throughout his football playing career. And I think a lot of the draft starts with your offensive line. You can easily get a rotational defensive line piece. Maybe not, they're not going to be as dominant a potential of a Jalen Carter, but I think you shore up your offensive line first to protect your number one priority, and that is number 1, Justin Fields. So I believe there were so many factors into that, but like I said, it was the fatigue. Like I said, it was the team need when needing to protect Justin Fields. It was a little bit of the character questions. So it was a lot of factors that's with, I personally believe, went into the Bears not selecting Jalen Carter and ended up going in with Darnell Wright out of Tennessee. But I think either pick would have been a very solid pick or a very good pick for this Bears team. But the need was to protect Justin Fields. He got a little bit banged up last year. The offensive line also didn't help with a lot of – they had a very good amount of injuries last year. So at the end of the day, Justin Fields was the number one priority, was to protect him. So this episode is going into an hour long, and I'm probably going to conclude it at this point right now, and that is going to do it for the season finale of Chicago Bears Weekly. And I want to say thank you, and I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I appreciate you guys for joining. This has been a good day. This has been a good ride. The Bears draft was good. And I am going to see you guys. See you later. See you later. I am going to see you guys within the next couple of days. I got some more content to post, so I'm not going anywhere. The channel is not going anywhere. It's just a couple of episodes of Chicago Bears Weekly. Those are going to be gone for a while. I'm going to bring it back at some point as we head into the season, where we're probably going to start out looking more of where the season is going to go and our predictions and everything like that. So season 7 is coming. Season 7 is coming. It's not one of those things that this series is going to go away. Chicago Bears Weekly season 7 is coming. I don't know exactly what day I'm going to debut the episode. You guys stay tuned to my channel posts and leak and things like that. So stay tuned. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to be gone forever. It's just something I'm trying to take a little bit of a hiatus on now that the draft is completed, and now that we already reviewed the draft class. So season 7 is coming, and season 7 is probably going to be more of us outlooking where the Bears are going to be in 2023 and what our predictions and projections are. I'm probably going to do it might be a little bit sooner. I want to say because of these schedules coming out at some point next month, when tomorrow's already the 1st. So we're going to do that as well. So at the end of the day, we are still going to be operating on Chicago Bears Weekly. I might do a special episode. I'm just probably going to do a special episode or a special video for when the schedule comes out. So we'll wait and see. Like I said, stay tuned to my community post. Stay tuned to my other Facebook posts as well. Oh, man, not Facebook. My other Twitter posts or whatever as well. So just stay tuned for that. APW Sports signing out. Thank you guys for tuning in. Have a great next day, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.